Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I started my retreat a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago, and have been really enjoying being in the monastery in a different way than I've been accustomed to the past 20 some odd years. Having spent so much of my monastic life helping to build the monastery, being one of the crew in the building phases. It's nice to be able to kind of step back and enjoy the fruits of that, and to look on from a bit more of a slightly distant view, just to be able to enjoy the beauty of the land and the amazing structures that we have and the community that has grown up here. And to just be a bit more observant and watching, and a little bit less in the active, engaged aspect of the monastery. It's just quite a privilege and a delight to be able to be here in that mode. Appreciate the communities offering this time and opportunity for me to do that. Interestingly enough, even though, or maybe because of the fact that I've been less engaged with the community and not talking quite as much as I usually do, still finding myself engaged in a few things, helping Lumpah through his surgery, that kind of thing. But still, it's interesting to notice how more sensitized in a way I have become just in the past few weeks to speech, and reflecting a little bit on the fact that the Buddha placed a lot of emphasis on that part of the training, the Eightfold Path, right speech. He gave it a whole part of the Eightfold Path all to itself. Reflecting on that a bit, why so much emphasis on right speech? And we chanted our Patimokkha tonight. It's the new moon, and so it's the Patimokkha day, chanting day. And afterwards, we had a bit of a discussion, and there was just a minor issue that came up for discussion, and a few slightly different opinions about things. I wouldn't actually say, major disagreements or even minor disagreements, just differences. And I was just reflecting on how skillful I think our community is, certainly endeavors to be in the area of speech, particularly when it's set against the backdrop of how speech is happening out in the outside world these days, tuning into the news, and just listening to what's going on out there. I actually find myself not doing that a whole lot because because I've been in retreat and a little bit more in the background. But I find it so disturbing, the level of unskillful speech that happens out there, and in very important circles from very important people, all across the board, and just how disturbing that is to the heart, to the mind. And so grateful that we have a community that practices and emphasizes not only restraint in the speech, but really trying to practice positive right speech. And just how, a minor discussion like we were having today could, in the outside world, just turn into a whole slurry of views and opinions and upset and taking sides and harming each other with verbal daggers, as it goes in the Buddhist teachings. And how, despite the fact that people have different ideas, that there is a genuine allowance for that and an acknowledgement that's part of just being a human being, and listening and reflecting and not being afraid to speak what our heart tells us, but also not trouncing on other people when there is a difference. So I was just noticing that and appreciating that as part of this communal ethic that we have here, and realizing that the Buddha really emphasized that in a strong way. So much of our time and energy is spent in communicating, particularly in a community like this, where there's a lot of interaction and emphasis on community working together, living together, and the power that that kind of lifestyle, this kind of lifestyle, has in forming our path of practice. We have some pretty clear guidelines on bodily action. In some ways, that's a little bit easier to see and to deal with, because bodily actions are very evident. That's just the way they are, and the restraint around, at least from the precepts, it's pretty clear what killing means and what stealing means, and what sexual misconduct means. It's all fairly obvious, and not always easy, of course, as we're training ourselves in bodily action, but very concrete. And all the precepts around speech are very detailed, because there's so many different ways that we can cause harm to others and to ourselves through speech. And it's more subtle in some ways and more automatic, and not quite so obvious. So a lot of, in the monastic Pativoka rules, there's quite a few rules around all the various nuances of ways that we can use speech unskillfully and to prevent ourselves from doing that. But it also, so we have the restraint of the Patimokkha rules as a guideline, but we can also really start to learn how to take that a bit further, I think, in terms of listening. It's easier in some ways. It's hard. Actually, it's very hard, but easier in some ways to restrain oneself from speaking in unskillful ways than it is to actually turn that around into a positive trait of actually starting to listen carefully. How many times do we find ourselves in a position of, say, having a conversation with somebody, and we're not really listening to what they're saying, but we're kind of preparing and anticipating what it is that we're going to say as soon as they're finished talking, and how much we kind of really miss what somebody else might be saying because we're planning our next comment or our next expression of viewpoint. And how sometimes that's even like we find ourselves interrupting and finishing people's thoughts so that we can go ahead and get on to our thought. We're just so caught up in what it is that we like to express that we kind of tune out to what's going on for somebody else. Or if we're more restrained and we can actually prevent ourselves from interrupting somebody and let them finish, but how much of that time are we still really listening to them? We're still involved in our own world, or if we've got something else that we think we need to do and somebody's kind of going on for a while, how we kind of just completely tune out. I mean, I think we've all had that experience of both on the giving and the receiving end of you're sitting there and you're saying something or trying to expound on something or trying to explain something, and maybe you're talking on for a little while and you kind of look over at the person across from you and there's that glazed look of patiently waiting, but you kind of get the sense of, oh, they're not really there. They're not hearing this. And then as soon as you finish, you get this kind of, yeah, from the other person, and then they get up and leave, or it's sort of kind of left there hanging. Or find ourselves doing that ourselves, see that happening, or again finishing off somebody else's comment. I've thought about this a lot and try and practice really not finishing people's statements just so I can get on to mine. But it's a hardwired habit for many, if not most of us. I actually just found myself doing it this morning with somebody. Just they took a pause in their what they were saying, and I finished their thought for them, and I thought, oh, I just did it. So really taking right speech and restraint of harmful speech a bit further into really learning how to deeply listen. And that is a whole different energy. There's the energy of speaking, and also its precursor to speech is thought. That whole energy is a very outward-going, very uncontained, often not very reflective process. And it's based on usually some form of conceptual proliferation, which just kind of goes on as a manifestation of our trying to get a viewpoint across, ultimately trying to assert some aspect of ourself. something coming from a self-viewpoint, a self-expression, trying to make its way out into the world of existence, a way of defining our position, defining our place, defining who we are, creating a sense of self through speech. It's a form of becoming energy, really, a form of bhava, establishing ourselves in relation to other people by defining concepts, opinions, views, using speech and words for that reason, to be someone. So we can try and see the discomfort of that, actually, if we look at it, the pain of that form of becoming, and see how speech really is one of the prime ways that we do that, speech and thinking. And the reversal of that kind of opening and listening to others, really tuning into someone else's experience, not just passively waiting until they're through, but really opening and being alert to what it is that might be motivating them, what are they feeling, what are they thinking, and kind of stepping out of the way with our own thoughts and opinions, and tuning into what it is they're saying and what might be happening for them, and just questioning, exploring, and creating a space, an open space between yourself and another person that allows that expression to be put out there and received, really heard. That takes a whole different style of mind presence than just patiently waiting to exert or assert our own opinions. And we can do that for ourselves too. Kind of trying to stop that whole process of surging forth in creation of ourselves, of our identities in relation to other people. We can do that inside ourselves and start to listen more. The whole thinking process, the conceptual proliferation process, is something that we spend so much of our time engaged in, even when we're involved in other activities. Ajahn Sucitto has a favorite phrase that he uses, that sometimes we're just like heads on wheels, just moving from one space to another, wheeling through, head slightly tilted forward, not aware of much of anything except our thinking and our opinions and our ideas and our proliferations, forgetting that there's actually a body here moving through space. Heads on wheels is a great image. And how we can slow that down and tune into inner listening as a way of becoming really aware of how we create this world around us, of ourselves and of other people. So slowing down and drawing back from that outward-going manifestation, that outward-going energy, and starting to create space, starting to listen, and just receive the world as it comes in, rather than trying to constantly put something out there whether it's out there really externally or out there into our own internal space. Of course, one of the best ways to do this is by starting to really drop back in, settle back into the bodily experience, to just the sense of presence of having a human body. Because all these mental experiences, these verbal exchanges that go on inside of our minds, have a concomitant sense in the body, feeling in the body, experienced in the body. And we can get to know them and listen to them and receive them by tuning into how our bodies are registering, responding to that kind of activity. So to increase our ability to listen, to deeply listen, we have to attune ourselves to a level that's below the words. The conceptualization is a very surface level kind of experience, a very surface level kind of activity. And to really turn that around and to be able to receive and listen, we have to go deeper into the human psyche, into the mind, and see what the motivating forces are that are moving underneath the conceptual activity. This is more at the heart level, moving out of manas, the intellect, down into more of the affective level, the tone, the process of citta, heart. And seeing what the underlying tendencies are, the motivations, the fluctuations of mood, the desires, the discontents, the confusions, the anxieties, these affective tones that are always at play underneath all of the speech. And feeling their manifestation in the bodily experience is where we can really start to tune in and deeply hear, deeply listen, and register what it is that is truly going on underneath that keeps us spinning, that keeps us confused, that keeps us suffering. And once we do that, we start to get an insight into how our automatic responses start to arise in response to the discomfort from those underlying tendencies, and how we will act upon those in habitual ways to create a sense of security, to create a sense of stability in what feels very insecure and very unstable, and how that manifests in the whole world of concept, trying to constantly create a reality, a conceptual reality that gives us some sort of comfort, helps us organize a world of chaos. But we see that those are constructs as well. Those are just fabrications designed to hold up an illusion. So speech is a really excellent mirror for us to look at, because we spend a lot of our time doing it. Many of the other doors of the sense realm and of expression are muted in the monastic life. And also with the restraints on speech, it becomes a mirror for us to be able to see when we can't get out there and express our fears and concerns and anxieties through lying or harsh speech. When we restrain those kinds of things, then we get to feel those energies and feel those reverberations inside us, because we're not just giving voice to them and dispelling the energy, putting it out into the world. We're containing it, and we get to experience the reverberations ourselves. So that gives us the chance to see and learn how to give them space, because the only relief from them is when we give them space and see them for what they truly are. Really listening deeply inside. And that gives us the chance to see them just as they are. We don't have to take them as an absolute reality. We don't have to believe in our thoughts just because they're there. We don't have to speak on them just because we think them. And that gives us a handle on what they really are, and how they're just manifestations of deeper forms of energy. And once we see that more clearly, then we don't have to act on them so much. We don't have to turn them into thoughts. We don't have to turn them into speech. We can let them arise and have their way. We can see the basis, where they're coming from. And then just through space, giving them their chance to manifest as kind of the results of lifetimes of practice by letting them manifest themselves. We can watch them as they pass away and get to understand their true nature. This is all kind of a form of watching the becoming process, bhava, and how all of these tendencies rise up, these underlying tendencies rise up into the mind, into the heart, and find some form of expression in body, speech, or thought. But really looking at the patterns of speech, both internally and externally, to see this process of becoming as it rises up and as it manifests, and as a sense of self tries to form, to create that stability, to create a false sense of stability, and creating a world in our minds and in our external experience that we think will give us some sense of security. To watch that process and to watch it as it passes away. And as we get to see that more and more, through giving ourselves the space to really listen, to really observe, to feel the body, rather than just riding the tide, riding the wave of becoming, and creating that sense of identity, self, around all of these feelings and thoughts. If we just see that with space and clarity, then we see it as it swells up and it rises, and then without acting on it, but giving it just huge amount of attention, careful attention, but not getting involved with it, not believing the story, watching that wave crest and break and fall down and end. And we didn't have to get involved with it. We didn't have to believe in it. We didn't have to create a sense of me and other around it all. Sariputta, one of his famous utterances, Nibbana is the cessation of becoming. Nibbana is the non-arising of becoming. So he really experienced that and saw that as a truth, that cessation or the non-arising of that becoming energy, that surge, the ending of that is freedom, is cooling. That is Nibbana. Because being something, becoming something, trying to fabricate a sense of self in relation to the world around us is so much suffering. Very hardwired. It's what we spend so much of our time doing. Almost the basis for existence, really. Existence is also bhava. And it's painful. Having to be someone, having to try and define oneself in relation to others, in relation to the world, is very, very painful. So I can really see his insight, Sariputta's insight about Nibbana, freedom being the non-arising, the cessation of that kind of becoming energy. The need to establish oneself can fall away. And there's, of course, many ways that that becoming energy manifests. But speech is one that just has come to mind this evening because it's so powerful, and how much we can see of this truth by just starting to listen more deeply. One of my favorite memories that I pick up on every now and then is back way in the beginning of the monastery. There was another monk, just a couple of years junior to me. He's no longer a monk now, Pasuko. Anyway, he was an Anagarika. I was a monk for maybe a couple of years or so. And one evening we were walking up the road after evening puja, and he was a lovely fellow, also a great sufferer, and he was in a particularly down state as we were walking up after puja. And typically he would kind of like hang his head and just kind of and I kind of looked over and said, "Oh, what's going on?" And he was an Anagarika. His name was Kim Pongsa, and I just said, "Oh, what's happening?" And he just said, "Oh, it's just so hard. It's just so hard." I said, "Oh, what is it? What's so hard?" And he said, it's just hard being Kim Pongsa." And that memory has lasted with me. I mean, it was you kind of almost had to know him to appreciate it, but it was just this lament of being, this deep realization that being Kim Pongsa was just dukkha. And it's true, it's being anything. Being Karunadhammo bhikkhu is dukkha. It's just so hard being somebody, being something. So getting to see that becoming energy, how we constantly create ourselves, and how we do that chiefly through our own internal dialogue, constantly creating realities for ourselves that define ourselves, and how that really only can end in dukkha. So that can provide a strong motivation for stopping that process, stopping the becoming process. That's also reminds me of a question that I'll probably get this somewhat wrong, but essentially it was in Paul Breiter's Venerable Father story of someone asking Ajahn Chah. They had come across teachings from many traditions, but wanting to know. Well, I'm confused. Should I become a bodhisattva, or should I become an arahant? What path should I take to become a bodhisattva or to become an arahant? Ajahn Chah's response, something along the lines of, don't be a bodhisattva, don't be an arahant, don't be anything. Being or becoming anything is dukkha. So pointing to that process of trying to define ourselves, even in a spiritual context, trying to become the best monastic, the best monk or the best nun, or trying to be the best lay practitioner, or trying to be a good meditator, trying to be anything, and create, particularly if you're creating a sense of identity around it, is dukkha. It's just going to end in suffering. So all the ways that we can use the practice to get a sense of when we're doing that are all excellent forms of practice. And the area of speech just came to mind this evening, and how not only through restraint of the outward tendencies of speech and its precursor, proliferative conceptualization, but also learning to listen, learning not only to listen to others and really deeply hear, but learning to move inwards. I think Ajahn Yanako mentioned it last night. He talked about moving inwards, turning inwards, opanayiko. So that's a way that we can express this goal of deep listening, tuning in, just allowing ourselves to be quiet and witness and observe, give space, and allow this becoming energy to crest and fall without buying into it, without giving into it, and without asserting ourselves into the whole process. And that's a very strong path to the end of becoming and suffering. So I think I'll just leave that for a few comments this evening.